Well, the science is in. It looks like life does not arise from non-living things. Now, of course, we can still continue to do experiments to try to find out if there's a way that life could arise by natural processes from non-living things. But all of our scientific observations point toward life not arising from non-living things. In fact, that's why it's such strong evidence that we actually call this a law, the law of biogenesis. Sometimes things are so clear, so frequently observed in scientific experiments that we actually call them a law. And the law of biogenesis is that life does not arise from non-living things. There's nothing to contradict that. You know, the theory of abiogenesis is that life did arise from non-living things at least one time in the history of the universe. But is there any scientific evidence to back up abiogenesis? No. Every experiment that we have done has just continued to show us over and over again the incredible, insurmountable problems with trying to get life to come about by a natural process. Now, some people will say, but we don't know the conditions of the early universe. The conditions may have been different so as to allow life to chemistry to work in a way that would bring about life. Well, there are so many problems with that. First of all, we have done experiments to try to recreate the conditions that may have been present on the early Earth, but we need to think for a minute about what actually does it entail to have life, and what is the life in its most basic form. There's so much that goes into even the simplest living organism. The simplest living organism that we have is a bacteria called Myoplasma genitalium. And so that it has, I think, 493 genes. I have it written down here somewhere. But that's in the simplest organism that we have. Now, one could suppose that there is a simpler form that could have existed prior, in earlier stages of life. But think about what life has to have in order for it to be life. And there are arguments about what life even is. But basically, the things that we recognize as life, they need a way to capture energy, to harness it, and to use it. It needs to have proteins in place to be able to do different functions to keep the cell alive. And in every cell of life that we have found, there is DNA, which is like a set of instructions for creating proteins and things within the cell. So where do you get a set of instructions if nobody designs it, if nobody makes it? DNA is really the most fantastic code that we have encountered. And every code that is known to humans, right? If we find a code, we know that a human created that. We know that codes are made by intelligent beings. And yet, there's this idea that, well, DNA must have arisen by natural processes. But that goes contrary to all of our scientific observations. So, really, if you're going to be scientific about it, DNA is a good evidence that there was an intelligence behind it, that it wasn't created by the natural processes that we observe here on Earth. So in order to get a living cell, you need this, you need DNA, at least as far as we can tell. From every life form that we see on Earth, we see DNA, which is able to code for proteins. And then you have machinery that makes that happen, right, inside the cell. So there's enormous chicken and egg problems that even if you're trying to make a simple cell, you've still got to be able to have the instructions, and then you have to be able to transcribe those instructions in a way that will allow the proteins to, you have to have a machine that actually understands the instructions. So not only do you have to have a set of instructions, you have to have the machinery that understands the instructions and the machinery in place that can build what is the instructions say to do. And every cell in life has this. This is amazing. And not only that, you have to be able to have an energy source to harness, to be able to make all of those things happen within the cell. Now, there are some incredibly complex machines in every living cell that carry out all of these processes. And some people object to this idea of calling things inside living cells machinery. But the truth is, that is the best way to describe it. You know, we use this word protein, and sometimes that just conjures up in people's minds like a blob, like it doesn't really convey what a protein actually is. A protein is complex, a complex machine. And it's a machine that not only has the ability to do something that will be an important process in the cell, but it also seems to have foresight. It knows what needs to be done. Now, that's an incredible feat if you're trying to bring that about by just chemical processes to end up with all of these machines working in harmony to make the cell, to keep the cell alive and then replicate. So, for example, let me give you some example of proteins in your cells that you can't have. You can't live without these. One of them is topoisomerase, which is like a little scissors. Now, this is, if your topoisomerase, if you don't have it, your cells will die, because what happens is when the DNA is getting replicated, the strand that hasn't been unzipped is getting tangled up. It's getting twisted up. And your topoisomerase comes in and it snips it and untwists it, allowing it to untwist, and then it splices it back together. So you have a little machine in every cell, and not just in you, in all plant cells and all animal cells, all have topoisomerase, and it knows exactly what needs to be done to keep the DNA replication going. Now, you have other machinery inside your cell. For example, and by the way, you can't live without topoisomerase, but you need DNA to give the instructions to make topoisomerase. Okay, so which came first, the topoisomerase or the DNA? You need both, and not only do you need that, you need you need a source of energy to make topoisomerase work. And the way that topoisomerase and all your other proteins are powered are through something called ATP, which is like a little battery. Well, how do you get little batteries inside your cells? You have to have this machinery called ATP synthase, which converts and helps from the gradient. It creates a gradient outside your cell, and then it allows certain things. And I'm not the best at explaining the process, but I put a link in the description if you want to go and look at how ATP synthase works to create ATP and power it up. And then it sends the little ATP, and the ATP goes and latches on to all of these proteins to power them, to power what's going on in the cell. Now, you need DNA to create ATP synthase. And you also, in order to create ATP synthase, you actually need the thing that it makes. So which came first, the ATP or the ATP synthase? Because you need ATP to create the ATP synthase, which will create the ATP. So you can't have one without the other. So which came first? Now, these are what we call chicken and egg problems in life. You need all of these things in place to have a working cell. And it's really incomprehensible to think about how all of these problems could be resolved within a step-by-step process. So this is one of the many problems facing the idea of abiogenesis, the idea of a life coming about by chemistry and natural processes. So no natural process that we know of can come close to creating life. And I'd be happy to cite papers for you to show that life does not come from non-life. Let me tell you what you can do. You can look up any paper on the origin of life, and I can guarantee any scientific paper on the origin of life will not be able to show you life coming from a non-living substance. This has never been observed, never been seen. So if you want to take a more scientific, if you want to have a more scientific explanation of where we came from, you're going to have to look beyond this non-scientific religious myth of abiogenesis. Now, I'm not saying that we can't continue to do experiments in that area, but when all of our scientific observations seem to go in the other direction, then it's not scientific to continue to call abiogenesis the scientific explanation of our origins. It is not the scientific explanation of our origins. The scientific explanation, what we can see from our observations, is that life does not come from non-living things by natural processes. If you want to be scientific, that's what the science shows. So whatever your ideas about where we came from, if you want the scientific explanation, that is what the science shows. Now, we could eventually have an experiment that shows life coming from non-living things, and then you could say that there's evidence for abiogenesis. But right now, there has never been an experiment that shows that. And so, and I invite anyone, I put the link in the chat. If anybody wants to come on and challenge this, please, I welcome you, because it doesn't matter how many degrees you have. I know I don't have the scientific expertise that a lot of people who do research in the area of origin of life have. I fully admit that. There might be somebody who comes on here and spouts all kind of scientific jargon that I don't understand. But you know what? That no one will be able to do, no matter how many degrees they have, and no matter how much scientific jargon they know that I don't know, they will not be able to show you life coming from non-life by natural processes. So, and they won't be able to point to an experiment that shows that. They won't be able to point to a paper that has the results of an experiment that shows that. So, really, this is not what I'm saying. Really, there's no real challenge to it. It is still in place that life does not come from non-life. It's a scientific law. It's been observed every day of every attempt that we've made. So anyway, thank you for watching. And if anybody does want to have a conversation about this, I would be happy to do that. And I've had conversations with people on this topic before, but now I'm just coming out a little bit stronger. I've been more of trying to listen and be open to hearing alternative views, but I'm getting really tired of people spouting non-scientific crap and calling me anti-scientific for my beliefs, because what a lot of people are believing is very anti-scientific. If you believe that abiogenesis explains how we got here, that's a belief, but it is not a belief that is backed up by science. So you have a religious belief, and oh, good, someone's jumping on. Let's see. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Good
How are
morning or
you?
afternoon. Doing pretty well. I apologize. I'm out and about trying to take care of bank stuff today, so I'm not looking at my best. But you are very
Cool.
thank
Well, it's
you.
good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. You are on a topic that, of course, I love. I've been craving and even praying for more conversations on this. So I'm really thankful.
Awesome. So, is there something you want to say about it?
Yeah, but unfortunately, I'm even more so on on your side of the conversation. So I won't be able to challenge easily. Although I can talk on the supposed, counter claims of abiogenesis if you wanted to go have a back and forth, but I'm more convinced than I think most people are that it's and I can go, and that's what I wanted to share with your audience and with you some of the what I think are even more convincing arguments that are just not talked about often enough out there about why life is literal technology or biology is technology. It's not anything to do with random or natural processes.
Awesome. Yeah, please share. What's something that you've learned about that?
Well, it really started probably about 10, 15 years ago. I got asked to be on projects. I'm a coder. I'm a information scientist kind of person, and I've got a background in nanotechnology and things that help me just naturally fall into fields where we're doing the research you're talking about, where we're trying to understand and actually literally reverse engineer some of the processes that we find in biology to adapt to human technology, such as biomolecular, mechanical storage devices. There's what's called line one retrotransposon enzyme reactions in DNA that act as literal, not figurative, but literal, what I describe as AI type processes that not only help hunt down and identify um, code breaks in the source code, aka bugs or what people call mutations. DNA is designed to find those mutations and fix them. So it's a literal software autocorrection mechanism in DNA. And so information scientists are doing everything we can to create that in our own technology. And so seeing it already active in all life everywhere is just amazing. We're trying to learn from how God does things for our own technologies.
Yeah, that's amazing. Actually, I'm reading a book called Evolution 2.0, and it's
Mm.
talking about this how a lot of scientists don't want to accept this yet, but it's it's really true that the DNA regulatory networks know what needs to be done, and there's like an intelligence there where like the even these systems in the genetic code know how to react to the environment,
Yeah,
and so it does make changes in the organism based on what is happening in the environment. And what I love about this, and this book is written by a guy named Perry Marshall, and he does believe in evolution, which I reject evolution, but I still recommend this as a book because he admits the failure of mutation and natural selection to be able to produce the diversity of life that we see. And so he fully admits the complete failure of that, which a lot of scientists are not willing to admit that right now. So I think that's a good book, and of course that gets us a little bit more off the topic, of abiogenesis. But what you're saying is absolutely true about what is going on inside of a cell, and we should really appreciate life. It's not, there was a time when we could be so ignorant to think that a living cell was just like a blob of protoplasm and nothing really special about it.
right.
But now the more that we find out, the harder and harder it gets to envision a path by which chemicals could become life.
Absolutely, yeah. And I like to encourage people like the gentleman, the author you're talking about, that those of us that are becoming more and more familiar with machine learning coding and neural net type technologies that's probably the most eye-opening or opening the minds of those even like him that want to hold on to. And I agree with you. It's a literal religion. It's a faith-based religion, um, that we're all just talking animals kind of thing. That that the biology is literal machine learning, literal. So when we talk about this non-figurative, these literal AI type cognizant functions within DNA, not only is that technology, advanced technology, but um, we have to rely on human-made, human-invented machine learning techniques to download, and now we're uploading as well. We're augmenting God's code with our own. We're literally solving cancer problems and all kinds of diabetes, all kinds of genetic issues are being solved today because we're understanding God's code well enough to know how to help him fix it, or help his original program to fix, because it's designed to fix itself. It's just been gotten so broken over who knows how long that the built-in auto correction features in the DNA code are overwhelmed. And so that's why we die. That's why we have disease. And so the idea that these random mutations somehow improve, life, improve this, create new species, not only is that absolutely insanely false, but it's the absolute counter thesis to reality. And so as we develop our own machine learning technology, again, to read, to translate God's code with our own, that's how we're seeing those of us that do this type of work, that DNA itself is machine learning. So in human code, we call it finite state machines, which is basically a way to create the illusion of variation. It's a programmed variation. And that's what an allele group is. An allele is a finite state machine. It's a pre-codified set of code that can only change so far. And if it goes outside of that design change, the allele groups mutate outside of how they are designed to create that variation. Things break. The organism dies. You have diseases. And so same thing with machine learning, with our own human technology, ML code. We create this adaptive software that has the appearance of variation, of random type mutation type thing, to try to help create a I'm trying to think of the best way to try to keep it in layman terms. Just a pseudo random ability to try to test its environment, essentially, which is what a lot of the biologists assume that DNA does, but it does it in a controlled manner, in a programmed manner. And so when your machine learning model becomes mature, as we call it, we actually copy or have the ML tool itself relay some of those FSM, those finite state machine groups, those allele groups, to translate into the next model iteration. And that's how the ML models do what we call learn, or train. We train these models based on the code algorithms and some of the things that it helped to learn, better adapted to the environment, or the program that was adapted or designed to function, to do, to learn to do. And so that's what DNA does. DNA does the same exact thing. It adapts and transfers learned programming in its environment and goes on to the next generation. But it doesn't ever. The models don't make new models. They're identical models. So the human is still a human. The fish is still a fish. But there are pre-programmed artificial machine learning type algorithms in DNA to help the next generation adapt better to its environment. So if the environment changes, the species lives on. But it can go up to a point where it can't adapt anymore.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to say hello to Randy. KCA Randy says, not a law, I guess, referring to biogenesis, but yes, it
Uh,
very much is a law.
yeah.
And that brings me to say hello to Pigs Can Fly. Good to see you, Matt. Monophyly is, in fact, a law, and so is the law of biogenesis. Yes, I totally agree. Look, KCA Randy, Google it. And if you find something contrary, look, we'll have a conversation about it. And he says, you've seen behind the curtain. You can't unsee it, Rebecca. Yes. And I hope all will see behind the curtain, right? That, look, the best inference you can make from our scientific observations is that there is a creator. Look, we know too much now. We have seen too much. We have seen all the stuff that Joel was just talking about, we know way too much to think that all of this came about by a chance, time and chance. And so, yeah, thank you but I really appreciate people being here. I haven't been doing much on this channel, but I hope to do more. And Joel, I would love to have another conversation with you about this if you want to come on and talk about that topic. Like, we could do a whole thing on it if you have more to say about the machine learning and what you've learned as a
Oh
coder.
yeah, yeah, and just technology in general. Do you have time today, or do you need to wrap up soon?
Well, I was just gonna maybe wrap up this stream, but I'd be happy to have another conversation on this like another
Sure.
time if you want. So, but you
Well,
can, if you have more to share, go ahead and share a little bit more if you want to.
okay. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, again, I try to help people that have at least certain level of technology expertise to see what we're seeing, on these higher level, I suppose, technology development. So even like IT experts, for example, there's a lot of people out there that are becoming more familiar with how the internet and the Ethernet works, um, transfer, TCP/IP type transfer protocols, and we've seen that in DNA as well, in RNA transfers, and so to kind of help imagine, so to say, or put in perspective what you're talking about, the ability, the chance that RNA developed into DNA, that developed into this programmed life functions that we see in all genomes, to kind of put that into perspective on a IT level. So Ethernet, and RNA as well. They're both the same. They're what we describe as um, information type packetized codec transfer protocols, where their RNA is code snippets of a source code, just like Ethernet packet is. An Ethernet packet is where you take whatever it is, our video that are in our audio that we're streaming right now, or your text or a picture. Your computer system will break that down into packets and then send it in those pieces. So it's not just one stream, it's not just one picture. It's thousands of packets, and so RNA is exactly the same. It's packets of DNA source code, and Ethernet has what's called header and footers on the front and the end of each packet. And the header is used to help the rest of the gateways and the rest of the internet type machinery out there, the routers and whatnot, to know where that packet needs to go. And so to direct it. And then the footers are used to help the system know where the packet ends and other things, very complex things. And RNA does the same exact thing. RNA is also a packetized codec transfer protocol. Its header is called promoter regions, which people that are in biology have probably heard of before. Does the same exact thing. It's the promoter region on an RNA strand is specifically designed to help the rest of what I call the nanotechnology factory, the cellular floor, all the other components, where that RNA packet is designed to go to, what its purpose is. It's directed to move across. It seems, would you like to think it's random, but it's not. It's directed by these promoter regions. There's terminator regions on the RNA packet as well, the footer, as we call it in IT technology. And so RNA is literally this equivalent to Ethernet packets. And so the mind experiment, thought experiment, so to say, of trying to visualize the complexity. So the analogy that I've put together with talking with fellow technology experts is that if you can imagine something far more complex than the entire internet, the entire World Wide Web, right? Which guys like me, I can explain how the internet works, but I wouldn't even know where to begin to understand how complex the entire internet is, global internet. Something more complex than that was able to evolve itself, was able to develop itself from nothing without computers. That's the complexity of DNA, RNA, literal. So
Awesome.
if you have the faith to think the internet could invent itself, then biology, then evolution is for you.
and
Based.
abiogenesis.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Joel, if you are willing, I would love to do a show on the topic of comparing DNA to computer coding,
Hmm.
and have you kind of, if you have like you know, maybe slides or some kind of thing
Yeah.
where people can see visually what you're talking about,
Hmm.
because I think that would help a lot for people to get the idea, to be, uh, for people to understand visually what's going on with both,
The comparison.
computer
Right.
coding and that, and then show how that is with DNA. And Cygart did something like this on Capturing Christianity, the conference, where he showed what the complex process that happens when the DNA is transcribed, and then it goes through the ribosome, and anything that is not right is like kicked out. It's like there's
Hmm.
there's an awareness of what belongs and what doesn't, and it'll actually kick out the things that don't belong.
That's a computer
So
process. Yes, ma'am.
you're muted. Mhm. Go
Oh,
ahead.
well, I'm also in my car. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's a
Yeah, you're
that's a
good now.
computer process you just described. It's a filter, a
What is
computer
the
process.
computer process called? Yeah, what
When
is
you're
that
talking
called?
about when the software when the computer filters the ribosome errors, that's what computers do. When there's
Cool.
junk in the computer code, the computer is designed to identify and filter the errors. So
Awesome.
DNA does that. You just described how DNA does that.
Yeah, it really is amazing, the similarities, and it really does show that there has to be foresight involved in, because none of us would say that. I mean, I hope none of us would say that a computer code could write itself, and that all of these things, that are necessary
Yeah.
for communication between networks and everything, would just come about by natural processes. But what I hope the viewers will recognize is that when you say that life came about by natural processes, it's equivalent to saying that all these computers and computer networks came about by natural processes. Just
Right. Literally. Right.
yes, yeah.
Right.
So
Which, yeah, we can have faith that the internet invented itself, but it goes in even further than that, Rebecca. And I would love to talk more about it. And there is a wealth of information out there now, as far as what you were asked about, as far as graphics go. Um, every lab that does any kind of bioinformatic type research has to use machine learning models to be able to, again, to translate, to upload and download God's code. So we can reference any of those, that type of work. There's all kinds of papers about it. Sal, I've seen some work of his that shows the direct code translations. Even people like Richard Dawkins, of all people, has admitted that DNA is literal computer code.
yes, exactly. Actually, I have a quote from him here. He says, he says, you contain a trillion copies of a large textual document written in highly accurate digital code, each copy as voluminous as a substantial book. I'm talking,
Mhm.
of course, about the DNA in your cells.
Yep.
He has said repeatedly that DNA is a code. It's not just an analogy, it really is a code.
Yep.
And to respond, I will close it up, but I want to just say this last point about biogenesis, the law of biogenesis. So here's a quote from a book called Biology, A Search for Order and Complexity. Historically, the point of view that life comes only from life has been so well established through facts revealed by experiment that it is called the law of biogenesis. So this is not, I'm, reading quotes from people who are not trying to push a creationist agenda. This is actually what our scientific observations lead to. Evolutionist John Maddox, who was the editor of Nature magazine for many years, said it is disappointing that the origin of the genetic code is still as obscure as the origin of life itself. So there is somebody who was editor of Nature magazine totally admitting that we have no idea where the genetic code, how it could come about, or the origin of life. And look, there's so many more quotes that I could read from, people who are not, they're not, trying to get you to believe in God. They're actually, many of them, non-believers in God, but they are recognizing that really the origin of life, we do not have a scientific explanation for it right now. Joel,
And
do you
if I
want to say
may,
anything wrapping up?
sure, I was going to encourage you and others, as I've heard that argument as well, the law of biogenesis is not necessarily law. I encourage people, and I've seen many minds change, to just look it up, like you've already said. Every major university, including secular universities, published. They talk about there's textbooks written on the law of biogenesis. It is multiple decades in the making. It is, like you said, it is not necessarily a religious point of view. It is a well-established quote unquote law of biological science.
Yes. And so, and Antonio asks, does that mean therefore God? Well, this is what I
Well,
will say. We have things that we can scientifically observe, and then there are some things that we scientifically cannot observe. I think it's a good inference to make, to say, if we observe that things cannot come about by a natural process that we can identify, maybe a good inference to make is that there is an intelligent, and we see that they have signs, markers of intelligent design, that a good inference is that there is an intelligent designer, i.e., God. But the main thing that I'm trying to point out with this is that we're not contrasting God with, like, there's a lot of people who have it in their minds that abiogenesis is the scientific explanation of our origins,
right.
when actually it's not, because there's no support for it, none. So
Well, mhm.
if you choose to believe abiogenesis, you're holding a belief that's unsupported scientifically, right? So it, all I'm trying to get you to look at is say, look, if you're going to be scientific, here's what the science shows. Life does not come from non-life. That's scientific. Anything else is a belief, right? But it's so you can believe in abiogenesis, but you're not accepting a scientific
Yeah.
explanation. Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I like to iterate two other points with that, is that there are scientific conclusions that show that life, or DNA, or as we know it, it's physically impossible to have originated ad hoc, or out of nothing. There's so many conflicts, from what's called the phosphate problems to the chirality problems that I think you guys have all touched on before. But it's such a problem that it is physically impossible for DNA, much less RNA, to have self-polymerized itself. And I can go into the great details of that. Much less for not just the chiral amino acid chains that are specifically selected out of the potential tens of thousands of amino acids. There's only 40 used in the universal information codec of life. But there's also a chirality of sugars, which are required. A right hand sugar always has to be used with a left hand amino acid. For those to be self, whatever, out of nothing is physically impossible. It's just. And then the other thing is that even if somebody wants to have the faith that the internet could make itself, as we talked about, as far as like the foundation, the starting of RNA DNA transfers, the entire premise of evolution is creationist in origin. All of these ideas, the common ancestry and evolution, these all started from Christians trying to explain how God did it. From William Paley and the natural theology lessons that Darwin himself were taught at his Christian divinity degree at Christ College, all of the ideas, everything that an evolutionist would quote unquote preach, are at its root that they are stolen, literally stolen from Christian creationism, literally. So even those that try to make the idea, try to make the blind faith, I believe, inference is, use your word, that life did not start without God or started without God. Those ideas are stolen from those that said the opposite.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. Well, Antonio has this question, but then I asked the stupid question of God came from non-life. Look, God and where, like, God's being is not really testable by our scientific observations, right? So I'm actually not saying life, I mean, life, okay, I'm sorry, I'm like messing this up, that life came from only life and therefore God is life, and basically I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, let's make a separation between what is a scientific explanation and like what we can explain by natural processes and what we can't. We cannot explain the appearance of life by the processes that we see in our universe. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to look for a process or a being that is outside of our understanding and observation to say where the origin of life came from. So that's what I'm proposing. I'm not saying that God is like came from non-life, or I'm not making any statements about where God came from or what God's being is, whether he consists of life or non-life, because I don't think that we can really say what God's being consists of, right? Except we know, except by revelation. By revelation, we can, if you believe a revelation, which I do, that God is a spirit, then you can understand where God came from. But that is a belief and it's not scientifically testable.
Well, I like to try to encourage people like Antonio with those questions. So scientists like Einstein and Max Planck and famous philosophers, Aristotle, they reason that if causality exists, and if there's always a cause for every effect, then there has to be what they call a first cause, or as Aristotle put it, an unmoved mover. And so that is the scientific and the logical proof, quote unquote, of God. Einstein referred to God as the quote first cause. He used to think that the universe was in what they called a steady state, that the universe was infinite. But then when he discovered his physics of relativity, he and other scientists began to understand the universe is finite. It is the opposite of infinite. The universe, and Einstein goes into very deep detail about it, is a created finite event with beginning and an end. Whether it's going to be the heat death or the big crunch or the big rip, there's all kinds of theories of how the universe is going to end, but it will end based on the physics and the math that they developed over those decades and centuries. And so that precludes scientifically that the universe cannot be its own first cause. So that's the therefore God. And that's where, like Einstein has said, and others will conclude that God has to be the first. God is the cause of all things, of all life, of the universe, of everything, as Douglas Adams famously put it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to end. Thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate your comments, everyone. And Joel, I really appreciate you coming
Yeah.
on. And like I said, let's be in touch. I think we're in touch by email because you usually go by SFB mod, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So we can be in touch by email to make a plan
Yeah.
for having a longer discussion about the comparisons of DNA and processes in DNA with software and
Mhm.
computer networks and stuff. So thank you
Yep.
so much. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody. And please subscribe if you like this content. Thanks.
Have a good day.